Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. Right, let's go through the magic. Let's see. There was a lot of people who started, but very few who finished. Um, let's see. So there was Rachel, I think, started. Maybe it's finished. Then Cotton, which is a new person. Fantastic. I'm opening them up. Anis. I don't think Anis finished. Neither did Vel. You can see it's still a sketch. Arms. Arms finished. Elite noob. Elite noob. Here's Atski's. Super Grubly. So many. Black Eye P. Tasty Brush. Oh. Tasty Brush decided to join in. Red Clay Skull. Pretty cool, pretty cool. And Zealin. And if I'm not mistaken, was some other one. Yeah, that one from Damian didn't update. So I guess this is the sketch. Yeah. Does that work? Oh, it works. Drag. Great. And yes, the mill. There's arms again. Cottons. Atsuki. Hopefully it's the same. Possibly. And Zelin. Alright. Hey Zelin. Noteless. No, you're just in time. You're just in time, Noteless. Gonna go through the 2-week challenge stuff. Ah, nice, Cotton, nice. Well, welcome. So let's start with this one. Who was it? It was, I'll put that away. JSD Mill. I think overall it's a great interpretation of the topic. Topic being, I might as well do that one as well. God damn it. The topic was, I'll read the topic. This time around we will play with something made out of water. Is it a magician manifesting a water spell? Is it an alien life form? Water demon? It is your call, but the challenge of this round is to portray water to the best of your ability. So you could play around with whatever you wanted, but as long as water being the main focus. So I think this one is pretty cool. I like the idea of a skull, and like a helmet. I think that's a really cool idea, like conceptually. Uh, if we, I think overall the picture reads as a whole. If we do a squint test, being this is me simulating a squint test. Like how when you blur when you squint. Hey Yatsuki, how's it going? Zilin. The overall the relationships work. But we can see kind of when we're squinting that there's a lot of stacked lines in high contrast. So when we unsquint the image, yes, this is our technical terms, they become the issue. What I see is that it's too much high contrast areas, and I think you would gain from leveling it out a bit more, so that it's not so how to say it, like jagged or jarring in terms of high contrast values. Like one easy way is to flip it upside down, and if we remove changes, you can see that there is some flow in there, but most of it is just very high contrast, and regardless of the placement of it as an object, right? But then an additional layer to that, I would say, is the edge treatment. A lot of your edges are the same. I would vary the intensity, the sharpness of some edges a little bit more, so that you can pull focus where you need the focus, because at this stage it's not a concept, right? It's an illustration. You're illustrating the concept, the idea of it, right? It's not rather a production line or production artwork. It's more like you're describing the idea, and then I would start playing around with edges and color and selling what you're trying to sell to the viewer. And with that being said, you are trying to show that it's a water-based like spacesuit, alien, whatever the concept. I think it's a cool idea. The shapes that you've designed read water, but the material behavior kind of reads like water, but I think it's lacking a few layers to it. Some few little telltale things that, as an observer, you go, oh, that's absolutely water, without a doubt. And what I'm doing now is just playing around a little bit with the intensity of sharpness around this kind of how the tears float like in space. It comes down to a lot of edge variety in these situations. Like, where do you want the eye to land? And you got to really push the sharpness and push the intensity of those things for us to know where to land, like where to relax our eyes and take the image in. Because if you don't have that, it's going to be really hard to direct your eye. And when everything is equally defined, it's very easy to be confused. So you gotta hold the hand of the observer a little bit. Also, I would add a little bit more hue variety into the water, especially trying to indicate depth of the water, how it is it Fresnel, the highlights, but also as water isn't a solid, you kind of want to indicate that the water itself is translucent, so it's not like glass just showing the background, because it's not absolute see-through material. It has a body itself, it has a tone, a hue in itself, so that with the water it also comes with a local color of the water. It can be brown, green, whatever. But when it's just blue, you're only suggesting it's water rather than what kind or the behavior. Hey, Osorio, thanks for the follow, man. Yeah, Captain Boss, it's a 2-week challenge review. Yeah, that will be my changes. Work on edges, work a little bit more on color variation. Give it a little bit more kind of complexity. Definitely edge variation, and work on those contrast areas. It's a cool idea. It just needs more definition and sharpness at places so that we know where to look. And also where you can suggest, like I said, behavior of the material, the element. Like maybe the back end of the bubble, the edges are very, very soft and we get murky is the word, and then edges closer to us gets very sharper and cleaner and more defined edges. That would be that. That would be my thoughts on that. But it's a cool idea of a water and swirling around. Cool. Nice idea. Next one would be what was that person's name? Damjan Georgievsky. Oh. So this is his first underwater work. He's having trouble to correct his polishing things too much, and it tips on restrain myself to let me know. Finally, I'm practicing using more coloration, which I suck at. Skulls are always good, yeah, man, for sure. For me, this is far too sketchy. I know that you're struggling with defining edges. One second. I'll open today's warm-up. Let's see. And the reason why I opened today's warm-up was because I did a study of Frazetta, and I'll try to describe the thinking, which I was talking about on today's episode, today's warm-up, which you should look. And I was trying to explain like the process of certain artists where they make a brush mark and they think more about the intent of the brush mark and direction of the surface that they're trying to explain, and kind of marking a larger area, and then by letting that marks rest, you're not trying to adjust them too much, but enhance them, so that when you are making when you're advancing the painting, it's not about repainting the same area too much in terms of details, so that, for example, then um, so when you're doing this painting of yours, um, you have to think, okay, where should we be looking? Number one, which is, the values are all over the place. Um, if you look at it in grayscale, we don't really know. There's no real calmness except up in this area here. There's a clear structure that we can follow. So that being said, like you want to when you choose colors, you also need to think about the value of them and the light direction of the form you're trying to describe. And this is the same underwater. There is a light direction in underwater because it's usually top lit, unless there's an artificial light source like magic or so all these things that you're describing, they have to be unified in the way the direction of the light. I mean, obviously there can be bounce lights and all these things, but they have to be clear, precise, and in a hierarchy, so that when we look at something, we can understand the relationship. And it's all about communication to the viewer, because you might have the perfect explanation in your head, but us as an observer of your picture, you have to describe it to us in a way where we understand it. And one of those things is cohesive lighting conditions or light conditions. And it can be tricky, but you have to be rigorous when you're defining form, so that every decision you're making in color or value or hue, that is all based on the relationship between each other. Would you decide on the value and the hue in a picture at the same time? You have to do it. If you don't do it at the same time, you have to be aware of your process of when you do have to decide. For example, like if you would paint with a darker, I mean, you have to make the decision of value and hue if you're going to paint in color. You can't, I mean, of course you can separate the process and go, okay, first grayscale, I'm going to paint the painting in grayscale, like I'm doing now. Now I don't, it doesn't matter what colors there are underneath. All I'm worried about now is the relationship between the values, not the hue. And then afterwards you're putting the hue. But if you're painting with color and hue at the same time, you absolutely have to decide on the darkness or brightness of the color and the saturation and hue as you're paint, picking and choosing the color. And obviously you can have complex light situations where, for example, there's bounce lights and so on. Then even more you have to pay attention to the structure of the form that you're painting, so that, or also the intensity of the values. so that the bounce light isn't as intense as the main light, for example, usually. The hue changes of if there's a bounce light. There's lots of things into taking in consideration in order for a complex scene to work. And I would suggest for this person to uh, practice value, to paint coherently, and try to, when in terms of detail, to take a step back and simplify a lot of things first, like more basic shapes, um, and then make it more advanced as he's going along. Like to paint an arm, he has to understand the direction of the arm, you know, as a basic geometrical shape first, so that he can understand what happens with the light, what happens with the bounce light, and then of course, as his painting can make it more advanced with subtleties and muscle and all these other things. But if you can't describe it accurately as at its basic state, it's going to be a hard time describing it when it's not, you know. So, no, that one. So by just using the same colors, like your base, and only painting a stronger value, we should start reading the image differently. Obviously, you have some bounce light here with you know, some blue magic coming in behind. We gotta address that so it reads correctly. But overall, I think this base is pretty good. The challenge here comes from at what how you gotta spend more time in defining edges and add variety in the edges, because currently in a lot of your way of painting is that a lot of the brush marks are the same length, the same size, all the edges are the same, and it becomes very samey and hard to read. So there has to be a natural hierarchy of what anything you produce. It has to be crafted like a. You have to be able to say, I want you to look over here. This is what's important in the painting, and then figure out with a combination of edge control, contrast, and hue and saturation, control where the viewer looks. As a simple thing, if you only adjust with color, if the painting is gray, black and white, and only the hat has color, we're gonna naturally go to the hat. Um, so when you're choosing colors, uh, you also have to consider where we're looking and how we're looking and which colors you're choosing and what's important. But yeah, this is a good base, but from this point I would start slowing down and start thinking about edges and where to look and start working the sketch to the next stage without zooming in. I gotta be a bit faster. This is zeolite, is it? Yeah. Really cool. I really like it. Love the squid person and the water snake. I feel like it could use a little bit more punch, some stronger intensity, but also I love the kind of ghostly aspect of the background nights, but I would focus the light a little bit more to where it's actually needed for the story. Um, I get the idea that they're up there, but they don't need to have the amount of the full attention to each contrast. I think the problem is in a lot of cases uh, is that one tend to apply the same recipe to all shapes and forms across the image without taking the relative location or situation into consideration when they're painting. Like every step should have the same intensity because it's a step and it's in the same world, so they should be painted exactly the same way. But it's counterproductive, and it usually ends up making a painting stiff when you're not taking uh, like natural variation into consideration of how how things are being lit or treated. Um, so with those statues at the back, it's very repetitive, and it creates this kind of even Steven, no direction feel to it. So same goes for the water. I mean, this water looks murky and darker. I would I would have I would darken a lot of things in it, because it has when there's a full range in the water. For me, it tends to, I tend to think that it's gelatin rather than water because water is a little bit denser and then fully transparent. So I would try to darken it at places so it feels like water, and you can have a sharper turn towards the highlights in the water when you control the value range a little bit. Because the risk of always doing that is that it becomes a soft gradient between them, and then stops being a wet element or water material, and just becoming, I don't know, not water. And you gotta think about saturation as well when you have a light shining like this, and it shines through the water and is lighting the particles in the water. You have to take saturation in consideration, and and reflections. Was a rule. Water that's in shadow is transparent, and the water that's being hit by light is reflective. So if you try to think that like that when you're painting, so that the part of the snake that's being hit by the light will be very reflective and shiny and like a mirror, right? And the part of the snake that's in shadow over here, in theory, should be significantly more transparent. So the same goes for all these things here, right? It's being lit by that light, and it should reflect um, obstacles a little bit more. I know I painted over it, but does water self-reflect? Yeah, it should. cast its own reflection. And I really like the shining aspect of the water on the wall here. It's really nice. You could further enhance that by cooling the part that's not being having water reflection being cast on it, so that you get the interaction between cool and green. It's a really nice touch there, and you can enhance it further. But overall, it's a really cool image. Has a lots of potential. I think what's missing is edge control, focusing on focal points, where we should be looking, and how you can hide some elements and enhance their narrative. Like what looks like here is that the water is running down the stairs. I think that's a cool idea. You could, further make that a little bit of fluid flow down the stairs. Maybe have some other location close by that indicates it again. Um, maybe could have some water coming down a chute here. So subtle things like that helps tell the story of who this little guy is. And that being said, I think that this guy placed on the side here is a little bit odd, in terms of why is he so off center and leaves a line like this up. Compositionally, I would have placed him maybe here. Over there, rather. Because I find the image is the dynamic aspect of this is thrown to the side, and at least this way we're sticking in the center of the painting rather than being pushed to the side. So that would be my suggestion. Just kind of reconfigure where we should be looking, push the focal point a little bit stronger, think about the behavior of the snake and being hit by light and what's being transparent. It just creates a better hierarchy of shapes. And make sure that the highlights of the water behaves like water, the behavior of the water, and not a smooth gradient. Payan Tonto, it's a 2-week challenge number 26, review of it. Yeah, it reads really well, and it's a great attempt. I think it has really a lot of potential. Um, I would pay close attention to like subtleties now, like if it's a stone wall, maybe you can hint of construction. Make sure that there's hue variation in there. Look at reference. Make a mood board. Make sure that you're pushing the details where they need to be pushed, and have bigger areas that are falling into suggestive behavior, so that you start like arranging the eyes where we should look and why. But overall, it's pretty cool. Um, it's good stuff. Good stuff, man. Mood board is a collection of photo references that you can lean on. Yeah. So difference washed out and evenly spread attention to the whole image. More corrected focal point. More attention to material behavior and readability. Look at the thumbnail window a lot, the navigator, to see what's important and what's not important. Push. Oh, it's cool. Yeah, you've seen the reference. It's way more pooled light and controlled values. It's a fantastic idea, though. You should try to finish it. I'm not going to have time to go through them all, so now I have to pick up the pace. But it's going to be more or less the same feedback to a lot of people. I think this one is really cool. This was by me and my memory. Red Clay Skull here in the chat. Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. It would be the same. The difference between the two is only highlight, which signifies which water is where. In order to sell the idea fully, um, that it is water, um, I would add a visual difference to it. It doesn't need to be a lot, but it needs to indicate the behavior um, of the material you're trying to suggest. So that when we look at it, we don't need to guess what that white part is. We understand it's water because of our innate understanding of how water acts, right? I think overall it's a cool design, cool idea. I would like the same for Zeolin. I would push and pull values and hue shifts and sharpness of edges to places so that it directs our eye a lot better in the sense of fast and slow turning forms, hue variation, so on. Because I see that there's a 3D base, um, so it's even more important that you add variety into the edge control. There's always a tendency when you don't spend a lot of time with the model that the model is very basic in the complexity of shapes, and really good modelers spend time with sharp and soft edges on the actual model. And if you do it in a fast way to get the base, you have to manually go in and sharpen and soften edges with an artistic sensibility in order for it to read better. But overall, pretty cool idea. The framing of him is a bit odd, that he has all this dead space. Um, I get the purpose of it is to have a better crop, and you could use that fact to sell the behavior of the water, for example, or the behavior of the helmet. Is that you have a background background light, whatever is called, the effect of um, water bending, um, distorting things in water and in glass, whatever that is called, that technical term, it eludes me, but there is a specific thing that water does. It kind of displaces. Is it water displacement or displacement of some sort? You can just do that to, help enhance the illusion of the behavior. Refraction, yeah. But overall, I really like the idea, and the highlights that you put in the eye. You got to be careful of them, in the way you apply them, so they don't become an object of the eye, but reflection on it. It became a little bit noisy there, and you gotta pay a little bit more attention, um, to how you're painting the eye, because one of the things humans does instantly is go to the eyes, face of whatever we're looking at. So that by default you should know that you gotta spend a lot of attention on the eye, and yeah, be mindful of edges and intensity of contrast and so on, because you want the viewer to take in everything as a whole, and um, not force them to sit back and try to decipher what they're looking at. It has to be arranged in a way where it becomes secondary. Uh, it becomes like automatic. In where we should look, and usually what that comes with, like minute details of edge control and hue, contrast, edge work, all these things, like I talked about to the other people. But all in all, it's a cool idea. It has lots of potential. I think you should keep developing it. I think under his chin is coral. So it's just all about delivery at this point. The design and concept is there. It's pretty okay, um, in terms of design. I would try to separate the the chin metal from the fish part. Just help sell the idea that there's two different elements there, just to further enhance the readability. Because if we look at your original, it's a little bit, it's here on the chin, which the separation is the best, which helps the read. You just need to, keep pushing it. But yeah, that will be my my very fast and lumpy feedback paint over. To just kind of try to enhance the what we understand of uh, what you've created, like the delivery of it, right? But it's a good one. You just keep pushing it and create a strong hierarchy. Oh, by the way, I see something I missed. That this is a fin. That means that this is a fin as well. That is something you have to consider in the way you're presenting him. That becomes very clear, because that design element gets quite lost. But yeah, cool stuff. Um, let's see who's next. I'm not gonna have time to run through them all, unfortunately. I'll do a few at a time. Let's see. So this on the left is from a new person. Um, Black IP and the bug in the middle. The new person being Fell. Well, I think it's unfinished, but the base is great. The shapes are good. I guess this would be water. This would be water inside. I think it's a cool thing. You should keep working on it. I like the graphical element in the background, the swooshiness of it. The posture is cool. The legs feel a little bit stocky. I think it's the evenness between hip, knees, and legs and elbow. It's all very chunked up in the same spaces. But it's a cool base. I would love to see it finished. This would be the Black Eyed Pea. I like the idea. The hero being water, and it's at water. I think it's a little bit of kind of cop out of sorts, um, unless it's a water shell, but it's not described as water, and at least not the impression I have from it. Um, but the little water there is pretty cool. I would say try to deal with the water being the hero of the story more than the insect itself, unless the insect is made out of water. What's your name? Bug. Black IP. Good try. Welcome to the 2-week challenge. And Tasty Brush. God damn it. You so good, Tasty Brush. But anyways, let's shit on your parade a bit. I really like the idea. I don't like the evenness of the waves at her legs. They're equally and they're fanning out, and it creates this two-dimensional aspect of her being three-dimensional. I would rather see I would rather see her leading the break and the water coming into frame more, and probably us see the backside of the wave more clearer. and here we would see the water being pushed um, more towards us, so that we can clearly see the change of direction, right? And the lovely greens you have to indicate kind of transparency of the water is great. I would continue that with the waters in front. Um, there's a lovely little thing with water. Oh, come on! What's this stupid behavior? Where it breaks and the tip becomes thinner, and then the deeper the wave goes down, the darker it turns. And it's a great way to indicate translucency in water, is to up the saturation at the thinner tips of where the wave breaks, because the water itself just becomes thinner, and in light, it's lighting up the particles, and it has less density because it's a thin amount of water, and you get a very good sense of fluid water behavior. And that being said, you can also indicate it by reflecting a cooler tone on the opposite side, and play with that relationship, so that you don't. The worst thing in a beautiful painting like this is having the gradients very binary, from one tone to the other, without regardless of lighting, direction, conditions, and behavior. So you want to pay attention to those like subtle things in how you're portraying the water and the intensity of it. So in that return, you'll get way more punch and juiciness into your painting and material behavior. But overall, it's Taste the Brush, the winner of the Unreal Bjornament, returning in full power, even though he didn't finish. But it's a great to have him back to the Discord. You guys should look at what Taste the Brush does, if it does more. But yeah, so I would like I said, direct the attention better. It becomes very split. And pay attention to saturation, both in the ambient light and the translucency and tone of the water. But overall, really cool. I would also continue some of these cool blues in the background, to help push the relationships forward. Very cool. Yeah, his chainsaw robot is great. Next one. Shit, my lunch is running out. God damn it. Sorry, guys. 1 second. I'll have to close down some of these. I'm just gonna run through them. This would be 1 second. Another new person. Where are you? Where are you? Where are you? Rachel. Very cool. It's the same applies to you with the other people. I think you succeeded in more making the highlights be harder and behave like water. One thing I'm lacking is a little bit of the behavior. The background is a bit flat. In return, you're limiting the impact of the water. The swooshiness of the water is fantastic. I would love to see a little bit more play with translucency and transparency, but overall the water sense of water is great. The lighting is a little bit flat. It's a bit hard to separate which is being lit and which is in shadow, and water in shadow tend not to reflect as much as lit water. That's something to keep in mind with the reflections. But overall, really nice S curve. Um, it's a great idea. I think you should try to push further if you listen to the feedback from to the other people. Great, great attempt, and welcome to the 2-week challenge. Hello, Rachel. Oh, you just arrived at the very end when I've been ripping through all the people and my lunch is running out. Yeah, the overall is a really cool idea of the Rachel's piece. Um, and same for this is cotton, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. It's the same kind of idea as for Red Clay Skull and Tasty Brush, where you have to organize the what level is where and where should we look, and it's the one of the first ones I did a paint over also with a water helmet is that a lot of the edges are the same, a lot of the definitions are the same. You have tried to add variety with it with the blur effect and the shift in harshness or hardness of the edges, and it's the same. It makes it read better, but you have to pay a lot more attention to all aspects of that, and not just blur it, but carefully craft it, because she disappears with the blur because you blurred around her. And the light is a little bit not flat, but you're mixing backlighting with above front lighting on the waves and normal like top lighting. So you're mixing a little bit everything, and you have to consider which is the setting you want, and you have to force all the values to fit accordingly. Like if you look at the thumbnail down there, it's very confusing. The sky is very white. The only thing we see is the head. I think overall it's a cool idea. You should just decide on which conditions the light is, and force the values and painting accordingly. Like make a mood board, and whatever decisions you're making, everything that's within that, within those conditions, you have to force right. Does that make sense? Like, you can't have everything in one painting with different light sources and directions and different behaviors and every edge being similar. First, light has to be coherent, otherwise your illustration is not going to read correctly, unless it's clearly stated that the lighting is not primary, which in this case is not, because you're trying to make it look real. Then after lighting it becomes material and edges, and you just gotta have to have a clear hierarchy, clear readability, and reduce information or enhance information to the point where if you change the balance between them, it worsens by adding more or removing more. And at the moment I think you can simplify a lot because there's a lot of noise happening in the painting. But nevertheless, great first attempt at the 2-week challenge, and glad to see a new face. I love the trailing of the fingertips in the water. There's some really cool splash effects. I think those will be enhanced further when you have a better hierarchy of edges and forms and light. I love it that it's splashing. We can see the trail of the hair swooshing around. Um, so just take a step back, think about what is the conditions of the scenario, and then force the painting accordingly. Arms, a really cool painting. I love the Fresnel, I think is the highlights on the top. Um, the purple smoke is a little bit confusing in terms of edges. I think you can do without that because with the purple you're breaking the palette, and it makes the painting look very odd. I know you love weird colors, um, of course, but you have to also consider um, at what point. I'm just killing the palette. Like all the purple mixed with kind of green, yellow, and blues, it becomes like who's the boss, and like by reducing that, and I'm gonna just do a quick color lookup. Uh, let's say this. By just kind of unifying the palette a little bit more. Hey, Robson Michael, what's up? By unifying the palette a little bit more, it'll automatically read better. I think the how you painted the demon is really cool. The air bubbles and all that is really cool. You should just create a better hierarchy of, first of all, the bubbles. They're very two-dimensional. They don't go back into depth or forward into depth. Um, the light on her is a little bit flat. I do understand why you chose purple. It's to separate her from the foreground, but I think you can do that with maybe a more neutral color, like I suggested, by just nuking it a little bit. Uh, but it becomes a little bit too much two-dimensional with the bubbles being equal size across the image and the purple just flattening everything. I would rather see you probably spend a little bit time indicating um, the direction of the floor with being having top light, and in return you can help define her being lit from the top by the water. Same goes for some of the structures, which I've already started hinting of. Um, but overall, you're suffering a little bit from the warm up I did this morning about letting brushes be more descriptive at places and then defined at other places. And it is a really tricky beast to try to master. I think last time you did a lot better than this. I think this one you felt maybe a little that you went back to your old ways of how you treat edges. You just need to create a more clear hierarchy of the shapes, which part of the forms belong to which, and then force all the forms to read rather than separating them into subforms or sub-objects by separating them with too much contrast. You need to let things lie within the form and then separate them where it's needed. And the more you have the same treatment to all edges, the more it's just gonna fall flat, you know. Does that make sense? Hey Robson, it's very cool to see you back here, man. Unfortunately, I have to end the stream. The next 2 week challenge starts on Sunday. I'm gonna announce it this Sunday coming. Anyways, really cool entry, arms. Just like you need the mastering, like what it's called when you're doing the finishing touches on the soundtrack with the levels and which is what and just rebalancing it. I think everything is there that needs to be there. We just need to push it a little bit more. This is fantastic. This is the masterpiece of all masterpieces. I know the guy who did it. You should all take a page from his book. Really cool. Much like a tasty brush and much like the feedback of the water, how it acts and behaves, it's something you can pay attention to. I think yours became a little bit too translucent and not hard enough highlights. The gradient from the highlight is too soft, and wet surfaces have a higher highlight, lower intensity of the water itself in terms of levels of value. Like water isn't white. You can put a piece of paper next to a glass of water, and there's a massive difference. So it's same with the highlights. In water, the highlights are really hard and they turn fast, right? They don't have a gradient to them. They go, here's the highlight. So this is a really cool attempt. It turned a little bit flat in the sense of how the highlights turn in the form, in Z depth, in and out. But they're twisting. I would say the twisting is a little bit too repetitive in order for it to feel like water. I would pay some attention to, much like I've explained about hair, like you need to lump it up first with hair and then start describing the edges. And it would be the same with water. I would first lay down the basic shape of the water and then start defining like which turn of the water, like what goes where, and don't jump the gun on it, and until you find a good rhythm of how the water is rotating around its own axis. So you're just not doing the repeating lines and then the form, and then you have to fill the gaps. That always becomes stiff. So instead, try going big and finding a good flow of the water and how it feel like it's sloshing around, like Glenn Vilpo says, like feel the form and how it swoops around, and try to draw the backside of the water and be expressive in the way you're making those lines. And then anything on top of that, you'll start defining the behavior, and you don't want to be pushing the finer details already at a level where you haven't decided the structure of the water. And we can see that clearly here is that you've already defined the each turn before you're actually painting the water. Like all these steps, it becomes very repetitive and flattens the image, rather than in the corner you can see a little bit of it, a natural flow of big and small shapes going together. And then in that painting, like obviously now it looks more like twisting plastic, right? And then you have to force in the behavior, like translucency. It's a fantastic choice of green, by the way. And all these things, like where what part is shining through, a lot of water behavior. And that comes only through observing water and what it does, right? And how it acts and how what translucency is, and what is the color of the water versus the color of the light, and what seeps through. Hey, Stacey, how's it going, man? That would be that, and the very last one is Giria. Oh, come on, brain. You can do it, brain. You can do it. Super Groovy. Giria, come on. I think this is a really cool one. I think the sense of water becomes a little bit more like snow because you're lumping it into lumps, and it's more like like froth rather than a crashing wave. If you look at Tasty Brush, for example, there's a direction, and as the wave is breaking, the water falls in turbulence and creates splashes, which are not solid; they're droplets. So when you have a uniform disbursement of those droplets, it becomes non-directional and it becomes snow rather than a line. And foam on water going back on a water or a beach is evenly dispersed. Then we read it as foam and not crashing water. And a lot of white. It's very white. It's very pushed brightness. So step one, I would be forcing everything down. And then choosing focal point, a much cleaner focal point and better hierarchy of where we should be looking, right? And much like at Atsuki, I think it was, yeah, Atsuki, the previous one, the the lines in the water being very repetitive is the same with the brush marks, and the size of the clouds is becomes very repetitive, and there's no hierarchy. So I would recommend, for example, for the sky, uh, start big, look at reference, so you have a clear picture in your head what you're trying to describe, and as you're progressing in the painting, um, go smaller and smaller in brush size, so that you can direct uh, the amount of noise versus relaxed areas, so that the intent of where we should look becomes clear, so that we as an observer is not oversaturated with the same amount of sizes, the same amount of edges, the same intensity of values, and so on. It's really important that that is one of the primary hierarchies in illustration, that we don't need to take a step back to try to figure out what we're looking at. It has to be relayed to us in an obvious way without actually forcing us to look at it and try to decipher what we're looking at. So that becomes something you gotta practice about hierarchy, readability, saturation, contrast, sharpness of edges, uniformity of light, so that the light itself is coherent, so that we don't need to figure out which part is pointing where because the light is cryptic. You know, I love it that you have hues variations in here. I think that's really good. Um, it makes things way more dynamic. You just need to be careful with your whites. Your whites are your biggest enemy at the moment. You're pushing everything really bright, and it's making the image suffer. And there's really no light temperature in here. It's very overcast and gray. There's nothing wrong with it, but you might want to, have a temperature in your lights a little bit. But it's up to you. But yeah, anyways, your version, very blown out, very milky. Not so much edge control and brush size control, that's something you gotta focus on. Big to small is a good rule here. Focal points, where should we be looking, so on. And that's it. I'm 15 minutes over my lunchtime. Bad Bjorn. Bad Bjorn. I'm sorry, boss. Don't fire me. Anyways, that's the 2-week challenge number 26. The new 2-week challenge is going to be come on Discord and Firestarter forums coming Sunday. Bye, everyone.